We're talking today to award-winning Black gay dating coach, Amari Ice. Amari Ice, how are you?
I am delightful, and it's a pleasure to be here, friend. How are you?
You were one of the first Black gay dating coaches. You've been on the scene for quite a while. Tell us a little bit about your expertise.
Well, according to the Global Love Institute, I'm the first Black gay certified matchmaker and science-based dating coach in the entire world. I've won, as you mentioned, a lot of awards. This year, I was voted one of the top 10 LGBTQ matchmakers, and the best for Black gay men. Also, one of the top 10 gay dating coaches. I'm a number one best-selling author. My first book is called Lasting Love at Last, The Gay Guide to Attracting the Relationship of Your Dreams, which you can find in all major bookstores, including your local Amazon. What else? Yeah, I've been in business about 7 years, and what I do primarily is help singles develop their dating skills and find love.
And for people who want to get in contact with you really quick, where should they visit?
In terms of social media, easiest place to find me is Instagram at princeamari, PRINCEAMARI. You can also visit my website, amarimeanslove.com. Any of the things I have out, books, videos, my YouTube channel, just Google me. Stuff will come up. So yeah, I do a lot of media stuff. So literally you could just Google Amari Ice and things will come up.
What are some of the biggest challenges when it comes to Black gay men in love that you've experienced coaching Black gay men?
Our culture really conditions us to believe that love is supposed to be this fairy tale experience that randomly finds us if we're lucky, if it's in the cards, if it's in the stars. And while love is definitely magical, it's not a fairy tale, right? So the number one reason anybody is single is because they're trying to have a level 25 relationship with level three dating skills.
Okay, what does that mean?
Yeah, so here's what you think about it. So that level 25 relationship is kind of like our unrealistic expectation that no one's real relationship ever measures up to. They're really about 10 to 12 dating skill levels, and you only need to be around a level 7 to have the confidence and competence of an effective dater. And so if we simultaneously have unrealistic expectations, that level 25, and the skills we have, level 3, don't even aren't even developed enough to handle what is realistic, it's no surprise why we tend to struggle in relationships. So again, the number one reason anybody is single is because they're trying to have a level 25 relationship with level 3 dating skills. So that's the first thing. The second is in terms of our emotional maturity, emotional management skills, like it's baggage. We are 200 to 300% less likely to find love again if we're still connected emotionally, either positively or negatively to past partners. And so usually when we think of baggage, it's negative baggage, like somebody did us wrong, a partner cheated, something like that. So we're very familiar with negative baggage, but positive baggage is also a thing. And this is when, say, you were in a relationship, it was going great, but your partner passed away, or you did something that ended the relationship. And so your ex is the one that got away, for example, right? Positive baggage is when we put a past partner on a pedestal and no one new ever measures up. We don't give anybody else the chance because we are still connected and pining or holding a torch or a flame for someone that we used to be with. So those are the two primary things. The third is around our confidence, right? If we don't know what we're doing, our skills aren't, at lasting love levels, we tend to struggle. So we won't take the risks, take the chances, take the opportunities that are necessary to meet people, right? And then finally, time and space. We will meet people who were at a distance, who live long distance from us, and we don't really get the time or the opportunity to build deeper connections. And that is often a function of our own emotional unavailability. So we tend to choose people who have built-in obstacles or walls to connection when we are still struggling with connection ourselves in some way. So those are the four things. So our skills, our emotional connection and past partners, the baggage, our confidence, and then the distance that we experience. That's often a function of emotional distance.
And let's get into level 25 and level 3. When you say people looking for level 25 and those are unrealistic expectations with level 3 skills, can you elaborate on that further?
When we are in a relationship, the number one reason a relationship is going to fail is not infidelity or money. It's the frustration we experience as a result of our unmet, often unrealistic expectations, right?
Mm.
And so when we think about the skills we have to develop, one of those primary skills is the ability to set realistic expectations because our satisfaction in a relationship is 100% based on our expectations, not based on reality. So the difference between our expectations and reality is how much disappointment we experience. So if the expectation matches reality, we're going to be satisfied. We're not going to have a lot of disappointment. We're not going to have a lot of discomfort. We're not going to keep looking for someone else because we know that what we want is realistic and the person that we are with can meet those realistic expectations. But if the expectation isn't realistic, then no real person can meet an unrealistic expectation sustainably. So while in the short term, we might, bend ourselves to try to make it work, it's not sustainably long term or sustainable long term to bend ourselves to meet an unrealistic expectation. And so that is one of the primary skills. But other skills include things like uh, managing our own emotions. Do we
Yeah.
even, especially as men, like when you think about the way we're socialized, right? A lot of men get taught from the time we're little not to honor our own emotions, right? We can't be afraid. We can't be sad. The only emotion that tends to get validated in men, the only uncomfortable emotion anyway, is anger. We can be mad. We can fight. And so a
Yeah.
lot of times when we're really sad or when we're really afraid, we choose to be angry instead as a way to like subvert those feelings because anger is validated. And if we're looking for a healthy emotional relationship and emotional connection is the foundation of that relationship, but we don't have a healthy emotional connection with ourselves, how can we have a healthy relationship with our partners? The emotional math thing.
And with our partners and the expectations, those level 25 expectations.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. So if we don't know how to manage, validate, honor our own emotions, we don't know how to do that with the partner either. And so then when we talk about getting our needs met, because every single one of our uncomfortable emotions tells us about a specific unmet need we have, which is interesting when you put this in context. So, as men, if we are not aware of our emotions, if we don't honor and validate our emotions, if we don't know how to communicate and identify our emotions, we also can't get our needs met. And then we end up in this cycle of frustration because of our unmet needs, and we're disappointed, we're depressed, all those different things that exist as a result of avoiding our own emotions, whether that's through conditioning or otherwise, but often mostly through conditioning as men living in a Western society. So if we don't know how to do that, we're at a loss in so many arenas in our lives, not even just relationships, but anytime we need to get our needs met, if we're not emotionally in touch with ourselves, we can't do it, at least not intentionally.
What is your advice for the men who have been taught that to have to explore or unpack or sit with emotions is a weak thing, or even simply to feel that's a weak thing? What is your advice, and also how does that impact the way that we interact with each other in our relationships?
The belief that emotions are bad, that they make us weak, that's all actually untrue. That's a lie. Your emotions are more like the lights on your car dashboard. The check engine light is one particular emotion. The you need gas light is another one, right? Like each of those lights is just a signal that tells us what the car needs right now. And that's exactly what our emotions do. So if you keep ignoring that check engine light, if you keep ignoring that, low gasoline light, like what's going to happen? You're going to run out of gas. The car's not going to be able to move. The engine's going to give out, whatever the case may be. And the same is true with our emotions. So the first thing we have to do is accept the truth that all emotions are actually good. They might feel uncomfortable, but they're good in that they tell us what we need. If we don't have that information, we can't get those needs met. The second thing is because we don't get that education or that experience practicing and dealing with our emotions as kids in the way that we condition women to do, we don't automatically have that knowledge or those skills when we turn 18 and become adults, right? So as men, we have to more intentionally seek out ways to learn those skills, which means we need to go to therapy. We need to work with dating coaches. We need to do something, whether it's read books, go to workshops. We have to intentionally seek out ways to develop those skills for ourselves because we missed a whole childhood of practice and understanding, right? And so it's not our fault that we grew up in the family that we did or in the culture that we did. But if as adults we're not getting the results that we want and we still choose not to put in any work to develop the skills to have those results, then what happens now is our fault and or our responsibility, right? So we have to take personal responsibility for our outcomes or else we don't get them. And again, the number one reason people are single is not because we're not meeting great partners or compatible people. Bay buffet is in the palm of your hands. We all have access to dating apps. Easiest way to meet people, right?
Yeah.
We're meeting people all the time. The problem is not a lack of suitable partners. The problem is ineffective dating skills. It's not a supply chain issue. It's a skill development issue, and anybody can develop the skills.
So you talk about meeting people, and of course, a lot of us meet people. One experience that I see a lot of people talk about, and I'm pretty sure you probably hear about this too, is people will meet people that they like, but maybe the person doesn't like them the same way. And there's this, you kind of mentioned it a second ago when you talked about obstacles. So how should we navigate that?
Yeah. So dating is a numbers game, which we've probably heard people say, but we don't ever really define what those numbers are, right? So if we take a dating app, say Tinder, which happens to be my favorite dating app to recommend to people, and I'll tell you why. Sure, there are people on Tinder who are just looking for hookups and not necessarily looking for love, but that's true anywhere you go, right? People are going to be people wherever there are people. The thing about Tinder specifically is the way it's set up is you can predict your outcomes based on the numbers. So about 1% of the profiles you see are going to be matches, right? So 10% of the people you see you'll like and swipe right on, but only 10% of those people will swipe right on you. Okay. So about 1% of the people you see are going to be matches. Out of all the matches you have, around 10% of those are going to lead to a date. Right. And so we're talking about quality dates with people who have similar interests, similar goals, and things. But the numbers being what they are only going to be that way if you know what you're doing. And so a lot of times people are like, oh, I hate dating apps. Dating apps are trash. When in reality, the app is just a tool, like a butter knife. You can use it to slather some jelly on a piece of bread. You can use it to unlock a door. You can use it to accidentally poke your eye out, right? The tool is not the problem, but do we know how to use the tool effectively, right? And so with dating apps, if you know how to use them effectively, the numbers are going to be very predictable. And so we're not looking for 100% of the people we see to like us back. We're only looking for one person to be in a relationship, provided we're talking about the desire for a monogamous relationship, right? So this goes back to those unrealistic expectations. If I only need one person to be right for me, of course I need there to be a lot of no's, either on my side or on their sides to filter them out. But if we see the no's as a problem, then we get discouraged when really the no's are the pathway to the yes.
Sometimes people will find, especially with, you see this in our community a lot. Somebody will find somebody and then go, oh, but his dick is not big enough. His ass ain't fat enough. He don't got enough swag. He don't make enough money. He got roommates, whatever. So what about now? Are those things unrealistic, or how do we navigate those sort of things?
So when we think about what makes someone compatible, right, there are five crucial components of compatibility. The first is having similar mindset values, right? So if you think about this in terms of being on the street, right, a road, a pathway, your values are what create the road your life is on. Whereas
Yeah.
your interests are like common ground, but your values pave a common path. So if a relationship is just based on similar interests and the interests die, so too does the relationship. But if the relationship is based on common values, it doesn't matter what the interests are, you'll still be on the same path together, even though your interests change over time, right? So the first thing is having similar mindset values. And by the way, this is an acronym. MATCH is the acronym. So first is mindset values. Then A is attachment styles. So
Mm.
it's the way that we form connections and relationships with people, and it's based on the relationships we have with our childhood caretakers growing up, right? And so if our attachment styles aren't compatible, or if we aren't aware of what our attachment styles are, it can create a lot of stress in our relationships that we're blaming on one reason or another, but it's really just the attachment styles themselves are creating stress and anxiety for the people involved in the relationship. So you got to understand what
Mhm.
your attachment style is. T is temperamental synergy. So, in other words, your temperaments, your personality types, you have to be able to understand and respect each other's personality. So, you don't have to have the same personality type. You can technically have a healthy relationship with anyone of any personality type, but that also requires maturity. So, having synergy in your personality types makes things easier, right? C is the capacity to meet your realistic expectations, which we've talked about before. And this is really
Yes.
the piece that focuses on your question, but I'll tell you what H is first so that I don't forget that later because I probably would. H is hazard free, which means no deal breakers. Okay. So going back to the capacity to meet realistic expectations, sure, there are certain things that we all want, but if we don't understand what we need, sometimes we see a preference as just a preference when in practice we're using it as a barrier to connection. So in other words, I'll use this with fruit first, and then I'll use it with the traits that you mentioned. If you prefer apples over oranges, right? If you have both, you're going to choose the apple. But if there is no apple, you'll eat the orange. That's a preference. What we often do in dating is say, oh, I prefer apples over oranges, but there aren't any apples, but I'm still not going to take the orange. Okay.
Mhm.
That's not a preference. That's a deal breaker. Okay. So when we're talking about these qualities like dig size, like money, like all those different things, we have to ask ourselves, why do I want this thing? Why is this important to me? And there is no problem with having a preference. What we need to understand, though, is the priority of this particular thing in terms of our happiness. Because the five things I told you are the things that actually make a relationship work and work well long term, right? So, dick size specifically is not a function of long term relationship satisfaction. But
I don't know. I got a couple friends who would disagree.
well, here's what I mean. In terms of the science, that on its own does not correlate with satisfaction, but your expectation of what it's supposed to be is going to correlate with your satisfaction. Because again, our expectations determine our level of satisfaction or not. So the other thing we see is we are often more physically focused the younger we are, right?
Yeah.
So we often use physical qualities as surrogates for the internal qualities, which are the things I mentioned in that acronym, right? So height, for example, when we say we want someone tall, what we're often really saying is, I want to feel safe and protected. And we assume that if someone's taller than me, I'm going to feel safe with them. But if you
Oh.
know that what you're really looking for is safety, and you look for that quality in a person, height becomes irrelevant, right? For example, I was in a long-term relationship with someone who was shorter than me, but I felt very safe. He was a Marine, he was a wrestler, like always safe, right? So if you know what the quality is that that physical trait is pointing to for you, because it's still different for everybody, then it's easier to find the quality regardless of the physicality. Now, when it comes to penis size, like you were saying, this it's the same question. What exactly am I looking for, right? Am I looking for connection? Am I looking for a certain feeling, right? Like when you look at the building blocks of what is under that for you, then you can determine if this is something I can get as a quality from someone, or if it's like, nah, I need this or else. And often when a physical quality is an or else thing, we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Ooh.
Often, not always. So, and here's the point. If a person has all five of the other things, right, that we mentioned, and the only thing missing is the dick size, you are sabotaging your happiness. However, if all the other stuff isn't there and this isn't there either, then it doesn't matter, right? Okay, cool. So it's like, is this the cherry on top for you, or is this the point? If the point is dick size, maybe you're not looking for a relationship. You're
Yeah,
looking
for a
for
sex story.
right, exactly. And that's fine, but just be honest about what it is you're looking for. Because when we think about sex, what we know is sex is always better when we feel safe and connected to a person, regardless of the equipment, right? You can have the biggest thing or the smallest thing or any size or whatever. our experience of that is based on the connection we have with the person. Two, no matter what the equipment is given, you still have to teach people how to love you, right? Because nobody is you and does things the exact way you want them to. Every once in a while, you meet somebody, it's like, dang, I didn't have to tell them or teach them anything about this particular part, and it worked. But that's usually in that one area. That's not going to be true in every single other area. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what are the things I'm willing to negotiate? What are my lines in the sand versus my lines in the concrete? And is this really a concrete line, or am I creating obstacles for myself? And so the other thing is, when we look at the data and the statistics, sometimes we want something that is so rare and we are using that thing as the end all be all. And then also we're setting ourselves up for failure. So for example, only about, I think it's like 10 or 15% of people are 6 foot tall or taller, right? And so if that's the case, 85%, and don't quote me on that exact number, somewhere around there. I forget the exact, if it's 6 foot or 6'1". But and regardless, 85% of people are shorter than that, right? So if you're saying, oh, I need somebody who's that tall, okay, cool. But then when we look at penis size, right, there's a similar number around like less than 10% who are like 8 inches or taller or longer, whatever, right? And so if you want someone who is really tall and really long, that's an even smaller percentage of people, right? And these are just physical qualities. And then when we're talking about income, only about 20% of people make 6 figures or more. You also want that. So now we're looking at maybe 2%, 1% of people that have all three of those physical material qualities. And we haven't even looked at the stuff that's actually required for a healthy, sustainable relationship yet.
Yeah.
So we have to ask ourselves, what is it that I want? Is it the status symbol so I can show everybody else, hey, look at the thing? Or is it our happiness and satisfaction and long-term companionship and connection that we're after? Because the strategy for long-term dating is a lot different than the strategy for short-term dating and hookups. And sometimes we don't know how to switch, because the qualities and things we're looking for in a short-term hookup connection are often going to be more physical, whereas the qualities for a longer-term connection are often going to be more internal. And not that the external things aren't important, but they are not the priority necessarily. Of course, you have to be attracted to someone. You have
Yeah.
to find, you know what I mean? Like, that is a given. I'm not saying you shouldn't be attracted to somebody.
Do you think that sex is an important part of relationships?
For me personally, yes. However, it's going to be dependent on the people in the relationship, right? Because your sex drive determines how often you are interested in sex, and your partner's sex drive together, then you have to have that negotiation. But if both of you have a lower sex drive, then sex is perhaps not as high of a priority in the relationship, right? If
But I
you're high,
mean, you're not going to be just sitting up together eating Chinese food all the time. So I mean, when
well,
you
it
do
depends.
do it, is sexual compatibility important?
It is important, but the level of importance is still unique to the relationship.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's why I say you have to be attracted to your partner. But when we're talking about sexual compatibility, we're talking about lots of different things. Sometimes we're talking about frequency. We're talking about, our drives compatible. We're talking about what our positions are, right? And all those things are different for everybody. So there's this bigger conversation around sexual compatibility that we're not often having,
Yeah.
but we are using these smaller conversational pieces as surrogates for these bigger conversations that we're not really doing a good job of translating. Because again, whether we're talking about length, width, girth, frequency, or whatever, we can't talk about sexual dynamics without talking about power dynamics. And we can't talk about power dynamics without talking about conditioning. Because when you want someone who's more dominant or more submissive, we're talking about power. And that power dynamic is a function of how we grew up, what we were used to, whether or not we felt like we had enough power in and of ourselves and enough agency to make our own decisions, or if we felt powerless. Because often our need or desire for power and things when it comes to sexual interactions is based on what we felt like we had or didn't have. And so we are playing out these larger, I'll call it relationship mythologies in our individual sexual situation. So it's like so much more happening when we're talking about sexual compatibility. But usually we just talk about it in terms of, are you a top, bottom, reverse? Do you like it here, there, in a box with a fox with green eggs and ham? And it's not that simple. And so I actually have a whole workshop called Sex Expectations that goes into
Okay,
all those
okay,
different
that's
things.
see that
But
you don't want to think too much about sex though. Like if you with somebody and they like to get choked, you don't want to sit down and go, is there something you want to talk about? Like you just want to choke them.
sure. And I'm not saying that there's a problem if you want to get choked and there's consent, have all the choking you want to have. So the specific acts are not the problem. But when we're talking about sexual compatibility in a long-term relationship, that's when the rest of that context is important. Right.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we're minimizing this big conversation to how long is your dick? And like that, that is kind of moot when you really see whatever else is happening and what's really going on. Because like nobody chooses their height, nobody chooses, their dick size. I mean, I guess you could technically have surgeries if you want to, but you know what I mean? Like nobody is choosing these things. And so for something that someone doesn't have a choice over to be such a big deal, that is where it requires conversation, particularly when it is more important to you than the things that actually determine your longer term satisfaction. So that's when I like to be like, okay, well, let's explore this. But on the whole, if we're just talking about hooking up, whatever size you want, whatever color, whatever, okay, fine. Get your life, go to the grocery store, also known as the hookup apps, do whatever it is you're going to do. But even on that level, we will have much more satisfying experiences when we really understand what we're doing, how it works, why it works or not. Because a lot of times things aren't going the way we want them to, and we don't realize it is a function of us and what we're doing, what we believe, what we expect that is determining the outcomes and not reality itself necessarily. Though the environment can also play into that. So I'm not saying it doesn't have any impact, but a lot of times we're not self-aware enough to recognize how much we are impacting our outcomes and results in our relationships.
So as a dating coach, how have you seen hookup culture impact our capacity to really date and court each other and get into relationships?
What we are often doing is using sex as a surrogate for love, right? That's what a lot of people are looking for, particularly when we're talking about hookup stuff, which is why, on the whole, many people, even though they're hooking up, and this is not everybody, but many people who are in hookup situations are not satisfied with those situations because they really want someone who is in their life consistently, right? Um, but if you don't have the space to feel safe to accomplish that goal, we will often do what we can do with what we got, which is meeting people, cruising in parks, cruising on the apps, whatever, because we don't believe what we want is actually possible. So we settle for something else. Right. So if all we want is a hookup and we are satisfied with that, cool. But when we don't have the space and the opportunity to have what we want, that's when hookups lead to disappointment. And so going back to your question specifically, the more we are accepted socially, the more you see relationships thrive. That doesn't mean that people aren't still going to hook up, but there's less of the drama, the baggage, the trauma associated with hooking up when we're doing it from a place of, I'm just having fun versus I'm afraid, I'm scared, I'm lonely, and I'm doing this as a way to get needs met that I don't feel like I can get met directly. So we just, again, have to ask ourselves, what is our real outcome here? And not get caught up in the fact that just because I'm hooking up meant that this is what I really wanted. Sometimes it feels like my only option. So we got to look at the nuances of that conversation because it's not just about the hookups for everybody.
Well, what about in bigger cities like New York, DC, or LA or Atlanta, where there are plenty of gorgeous men with fat butts and anything else that you want running around? There's really no incentive to get into a relationship because your eyes are always wandering. So what about that? Whereas in some smaller towns where there are less options, people are able to recognize when they have something good and hold
Yeah.
on.
And what you're getting into is the paradox of choice. And
Yeah.
this is when we are not experts in something, when we don't know what we're doing, more choices makes us less effective, more options makes us less effective at making choices that are good for us because we get overwhelmed by the information, we get overwhelmed by the options, and then we tend to make all the different criteria equal. And this is what I was saying before, where we're like, ooh, dick size versus the qualities that make a relationship last, I'm going for dick size. And it's like, that doesn't make sense when the outcome is a long-term relationship, if that is the outcome, right? But if I have too many options and I don't know what I'm doing, if I don't have the skills to date effectively in the first place, more options does not make it easier for me to find love. It makes it more difficult because the options kind of make me not make a choice in the first place, right? But if I do know what I'm doing, if I have a level of expertise in the environment or the arena that I'm navigating, if I know how relationships work and I understand all of that, more options doesn't complicate the process. It makes me more efficient and able to find what I'm looking for faster. And so you got to ask yourself, do you want a relationship or not? Let's start there. If not, then what we're talking about is not even applying to you, right? Because you're just looking for a hookup or nothing at all. Cool, easy. We don't need a class on how to get better hookups. But if you're looking for a relationship and you are struggling in these big cities, that is one of the primary indicators that it's your dating skills that's the problem. Because for most people, it is not, there's not enough options. It's, I don't know how to deal with the options that I have in the first place. And that is a function of skills. So that's why I was like, it's a nuanced conversation. We have to look at those distinctions. Because if you just want to hook up and that's it, people are fucking.
Yeah.
Like it's happening. But the problem is when that's not all you want something more and you don't know how to get it. That's where I come in.
What is your advice, or what are your words of encouragement to Black gay men who really want love but can't seem to find it, or are working on it, or just frustrated around it?
Yeah. So this analogy around dating skills is not just an analogy, it's legit, right? And you can discover your estimated dating skill level by going to datingskillquiz.com, and it'll tell you what the different domains of dating skills are and what level you're currently at. So then you know where you have to go, right? Because if you know where the gaps are, you can then fill the gaps. The problem is a lot of us don't even know what the real problem is, and then we feel trapped in our ignorance, if you will, right? And so my first piece of advice is to find out where your skills currently are, because if your skills are already adequate, then we know that, oh, it's not a skills issue. But for most people, that is exactly what it is, right? And so because that's true for most people, that is the first step. Figure out where your skills are and then what you need to do as a next step to develop those skills. Because remember, I'm both a dating coach and a matchmaker. So I can either help you build the skills or introduce you to people who are great for you. But when we're talking about meeting someone compatible, it is actually pointless if you don't have the skills to create and sustain a relationship with someone compatible. Because I introduced you to people and they're great people and they have all the things you want, including the dick size, right? Like got everything you want. And that is not what determines if the relationship is going to work. Your skills determine if that relationship is going to work. So we just got to focus on that. And so I will never not harp on that as the priority thing we need to do. Understand where our dating skills are so that we can then close those gaps. Once the gap is closed, we now know what we're doing. And then dating is easy. Love is easy when you know what to do. It's literally like riding a bike or any other skill. Once you've built the skill, you know what to do, you can handle it. But if the skill isn't developed enough, it's going to feel hard. It's going to feel like a struggle. You're going to want to give up. You're going to want to quit just because your skills haven't developed to the level of competence yet.
Yeah.
That's it. So take the dating skills quiz at datingskillquiz.com. And then take the next steps if a relationship is actually something you want. Again, if it's not, cool, no big deal. You probably aren't even watching this to the end if you aren't interested in an actual healthy, happy, long-term relationship. But if you are, like, that is of critical importance. Nothing else needs to be talked about. It is your skills. Focus on that first.